Meantime, what I'd like to do, if I may, just before we get into the Q&A, there's some very strong themes that came through in the documentary that I guess resonate at least, with us. The first thing I wanted to mention is the trust factor. And you heard the contract of trust between the pet food manufacturers and pet owners and their pets was destroyed over and over and over again. And the scary thing is that the brands that we're seeing in the documentary are not isolated or exclusive to the United States. They are global brands. Global brands. They're present in Australia as well, which concerns us. And as a business and as a manufacturing operation, we wanted to make sure that that was part of our value system about maintaining the trust. So everything you want to know about Proudy, we will tell you. If you want to come to our factory and have a look around and see how things are made and how product is handled, come and see us, because we have nothing to hide. Everything we're doing here is 100% human grade. Everything we're doing is manufactured in the least processed possible fashion, and it proves beyond a reasonable doubt that you can generate complete and balanced nutrition with nothing but whole foods based on a true ancestral diet. So that is where the Proudy product came from. Quality itself is vitally important. We chose to go human grade for a number of reasons, but the most important of which is that the quality of protein is going to determine the benefit in terms of health to your animal. Now, as you saw, there's various forms of protein, whether that be animal protein, plant protein, there's novel proteins out there, even insects are being reduced to protein. But protein is a very sensitive nutrient, for want of a better word. And it's also very easy to destroy the value of protein. And heat is the enemy of protein. So heat extruded pet foods will destroy the benefit. And an example for you just to share, when you take chicken breast and you heat chicken breast between 23 degrees Celsius and 65 degrees Celsius, the soluble protein in that chicken breast is reduced by 90%. So 90% of the value of the protein disappears with heat. But there's an industry out there that will tell you that rendered pet food, put through a machine at 160 degrees, it's okay, it's complete and balanced.
Most of the time it's 400. 400 is the average.
There you go, even worse again. So we are committed to delivering quality, we're committed to delivering complete and balanced nutrition and delivering that with a species-appropriate raw diet that's ancestrally appropriate. So we hope that you continue to engage not only with Raw Feeders Kitchen, but of course with the Proudy product. Invite any questions that you may have around the product, whether that be tonight or through any of our social media platforms. Get in touch. We'd love to talk to you. So, moving on to the Q&A, once again, Dr. Renee from the Natural Vets at Forest Glen. I'll hand you that one because Righto. I'm going to call on my faithful assistant. Erin, would you mind coming down? Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Erin. So I'm going to give you that one there, if I can. Thank you. So Erin's going to be our roving microphone assistant. So if you do have a question for Dr. Renee or for Cole, or heaven forbid for James, feel free to pop your hand up. Erin's going to come around and you can pose your questions to any of our panel. If you don't have a question, we're just going to continue talking, which is probably going to get a little boring really quickly.
All right, quickly, somebody give me a question. Make James stop talking. Excellent.
Hi. So it's probably a bit of it's just in my head, so I'm going to ask it. So one of the things for me was about 10 years ago I got my first pet and went to the vet and he recommended Eukanuba and I started feeding it because the vet said to feed it. And it really wasn't until years later I had several dogs who all seemed okay. My sister got her dog and said she'd started looking at it and was like, that's not a very good pet food. And I was in a bit of shock. And then I got a dog that had started having all these allergies, etc., etc. So I then started looking at the raw food and different things to feed. But one of the things that always stuck in my head, rightly or wrongly, was I was always told the kibble was good the dogs could have kept their teeth clean at the back. You know, like, and so, you know, then, like, especially with the Proudy, because we got them at the dog show, like, that's a very different texture. And that whole argument about how to keep your dog's teeth clean and stuff like that, I'm not sure really what the right way to do it is, because they're not particularly fond of me brushing their teeth.
I've got a joke about it if I may. It's kind of, does this work? It's kind of like granola keeping your teeth clean. I think it's like the opposite because of the starch, but.
Yeah, the starch is certainly part of it. First of all, I'd just like to say that vets get very little nutritional training, which is an unfortunate reality of the veterinary degree. And so vets graduate essentially sponsored by pet food companies. The 2 nutrition lectures that I got when I was at uni more than 15 years ago were both sponsored by pet food companies. So we come out thinking that these dry kibble diets that are marketed as complete and balanced solutions are great choices, but once you start looking beyond the marketing, then you realise that that's not the truth. And when it comes to dental hygiene, that's a complete myth that dry food's going to keep pets' teeth clean. There are prescription diets designed to do that, like Hill's TD is one of them, and I think there's a couple of others on the market as well. And they've specially formulated the biscuit so that when your animal crunches through it, it's supposed to have an abrasive action on their teeth. But the reality is that dogs and cats actually aren't designed to chew. They're a carnivore, they have teeth that grab prey and then they throw it back and they swallow it. They just want to scissor off pieces that are small enough to swallow. The teeth, they don't grind, they can't move their jaw in this way, so there's no grinding action. So it's very unlikely that any kind of diet other than their natural diet is going to keep their teeth clean. When you're looking at a natural diet, dogs and cats in the wild have very little dental disease, and that's because they're eating their prey whole. So there is an abrasive action because they've got to pull prey apart. They've got to pull off feathers and slice through chunks of meat and scissor through fur and all that kind of stuff. And that's having an abrasive action, which is what the marketed dry foods are apparently doing. But personally, I've never actually seen those to work that well. When you have a domestic animal and you're feeding it food every day out of a bowl, it's very unlikely that anything is going to keep their teeth clean, even a diet as clean as something like the Proudy model, because there's still nothing really abrasive in there that's doing what they would naturally be doing in the wild. So it comes down to dental hygiene. You need to be doing something for your pet to keep their teeth clean, and that usually means regular dental checkups at the vet at least twice a year, usually going under anaesthetic to have them cleaned on a regular basis, mechanically brushing the teeth with a brush if your pet will allow that, and using certain types of products that are also going to be helpful for keeping them clean.
Can we throw in meaty bones for that?
Absolutely. So meaty bones is one of the parts of the normal prey model that they're going to be crunching through in the wild, and that's a big part of it. If you're feeding your dog or your cat just a minced up meat type of a diet, there's nothing in there that's going to clean the teeth other than the sort of slightly ground up bone. If they're actually crunching through whole meaty bones, that's similar to what they would be doing in the wild. It's still not the whole answer though, because dogs and cats all have different conformations. A lot of them have got malocclusions. The teeth aren't always growing in the correct positions. There's a lot of crowding, especially in the brachycephalic breeds with pushed up faces. And so teeth are often growing on top of each other, or they're in the not correct position in their mouth. And so just crunching through meaty bones isn't always enough either.
Excellent. All right. Pop your hand up if you're ready with a question. Beautiful.
I've got a German Shepherd who loves to just eat, and when he eats really fast. And when I got him, the breeders told me to think long and hard about bloat, and obviously bloat can be quite common with the dehydrated foods, and you should probably put some water in it. When it comes to foods like Proudy and raw-based diets, should you be worried about bloat still with breeds like that, or...?
Not in my experience, and I've been recommending raw feeding for a long time now. I think with that type of conformation of dog, there's always potentially a risk of bloat, the deep-chested dogs that guzzle their food, and there hasn't been any direct links between whether raw or dry food necessarily is going to be a bigger contributing factor. I personally think that dry kibble type diets are the opposite of what we should be feeding dogs, and it does lead to a lot of problems in the gastrointestinal tract. And one of those is it changes the physiology of the stomach. The pH level isn't as strong, and it's fermentative, so they're going to be creating gas by eating that kind of food. So common sense makes you think that that sort of food is going to create more gas in the stomach, which is going to cause the distension that's more likely to cause that distension and potentially torsion, which is life-threatening. So yeah, I think getting them onto a natural diet is definitely a step in the right direction, and teaching your dog correct eating behaviours as well. So if you've got a dog that guzzles bones really quickly, you need to teach them to slow down, and don't exercise your dog directly after eating either.
One question for you. Did you personally have to go through a lot of trials and tribulations in order to, since you had the 2 classes, as you say, or courses? I don't know if it was classes or courses.
Classes, 2 hours.
Classes, 2 hours?
5
Wow.
days.
Worldwide. Did you have to go through a lot of self-research and learning or struggle in order to get where you are today, or how did that come about?
Yeah, definitely a lot of self-research, and looking at different papers and talking to a lot of different integrative veterinarians to find out what they were doing and what was working for them, and reading lots of books on the topics and finding out lots of different theories about what was best for dogs, and then obviously putting that into practice and finding out what works for me and what works for my clients. I personally had a fairly traumatic experience. My own cat was one of the cats affected by a pet food recall in Australia. So when I was about 5 years into practice, I was already on the sort of natural food bandwagon, but was still feeding my cat an imported food from Canada that was marketed as almost as close to a prey model diet as you could get. It's called Origin, and it was recalled in 2008 because it caused an ascending paralysis in cats that was ultimately life-threatening in almost every circumstance. There was no treatment, and I had been feeding my cat that diet, and she was affected by the ascending paralysis before the recall was announced, and after we worked out what was going on, then it was all pulled off the market. So personally, I went through a struggle because I was directly exposed to the downsides of feeding a processed food diet, and it was a really difficult thing to go through, but it certainly really put me on the right path and gave me a driving passion to educate people about the potential dangers of feeding that sort of food versus all of the benefits of feeding dogs and cats what they're actually designed to eat.
Just James, we step into view.
Yes, sorry.
So the
Just
world,
very quickly on
so
the
the world
same.
can see you.
Sorry, I'm not in shot, Cole. I apologise. Shall I address the camera?
Don't look in the lens.
On the same note, and tying into the raw meat focus comment from earlier on, this microphone's a bit rough. My apologies. We go back to a couple of names that are familiar in raw feeding in Australia. Ian Billinghurst, Tom Lonsdale, both were ostracised by the veterinarian community back in the, I believe it was the early 90s when they started to raise these sorts of things. So my question to you, and I guess something we hear a lot and we're trying to provide a solution, is how do we access veterinarians that have a broader view of nutrition as a whole? And do you yourself find it's a combative topic amongst your own peers?
Okay, so number one question, how to access. Australia does have an Integrative Vets Association, the IVA, and so there is a website for that, Integrative Vets Australia, and there is a list of all of the practicing integrative vets on that website, so you can find people around most areas of Australia, but unfortunately there's not that very many of us. It's a pretty small circle of vets at this point in time, but at least if you get onto a holistic vet, you're more likely to get the right sort of nutritional advice. The second part of the question, James, was?
Just combative in.
Just referring to your industry, so your peers, your colleagues within the veterinary practice industry, I suppose. Do you find it's a combative relationship when we start to talk about nutrition outside of the dry food?
Yeah, well, combative is probably not the right word exactly, but there is definitely dissonance amongst vets and with regards to lots of vets saying lots of different things. And I was at the AVI conference a few years back in Brisbane, and one of a leading emergency veterinarian from the UK did a lecture on the dangers of raw feeding and bacteria and causing salmonella poisoning and all those sorts of things. So this is the types of research and papers that are getting presented to vets, and a lot of vets unfortunately take that on without looking at all of the other research that's supporting the fact that raw diets can be safe if you use the right kinds of products and if your dog's gastrointestinal system is prepared and set up to be able to handle them. So yeah, there's a lot of vets saying lots of different things. I think within the integrative field, most of us are on pretty much the same page, so that's at least enlightening.
Testing.
Both my dogs are raw fed, and I've been trying to find natural sources of flea, tick and worm. I recently took them to a naturopath, and I don't vaccinate my dogs since I've gotten them from the shelter, and I was just wanting to know what your thought on that is as well.
At our clinic we practice very minimal vaccination protocols. We try and vaccinate animals as little as possible, and that can mean different things for different animals, but generally as a rule, say a dog would come in for 2 core puppy vaccines, and then we titer test them 2 to 4 weeks later. So we can actually check what their antibody levels are for parvovirus and distemper and infectious hepatitis if required. And in almost every puppy that we test, they have a fully complete protective immune response after just the 2 puppy vaccinations. They very, very small percentage need a 3rd one. And we only give kennel cough vaccines if necessary for training purposes or boarding purposes, and we always give it as an intranasal vaccine. We don't use the injectable version because we see a lot more side effects with that one. Adult dogs go on to generally a 3-yearly titer testing schedule. So we test them, puppies get tested, then we test them again 12 months later, and then we test on a 3-yearly schedule. If you look at the epidemiology and the science behind immunology, if your animal has had a 100% complete and protective immune response to a vaccine, it's extremely likely that that will continue for their life. So duration of immunity studies were done more than 15 years ago, and they proved that a high percentage of animals have at least 3 years response to the core vaccines. A lot have 5 years, quite a high percentage have 7, and very many have 9 years or more. And so the 3-yearly vaccines that came out around probably 8 years ago or so now was sort of based on that 3-yearly schedule. That's kind of the minimum that most pets will have, but a lot have more than that. And so that's why we test them at that sort of 3-yearly schedule. It's very, very likely that once they're protected, they will continue to be protected. With regards to other vaccines, things like leptospirosis, that will depend on where you are geographically and what's at risk and how often you would need those sorts of vaccines. But you're always looking at the health of the animal, whether they can actually handle a vaccination or not, where you're living, what sort of lifestyle you have, what kind of vaccines you need for boarding kennels, those sorts of things. When it comes to fleas and ticks and heartworms and all of those kinds of nasties, again, we talk to each individual client to find out what their needs are. Some people have extremely long-haired dogs with double coats and they live in really bushy areas, and so in those situations they may feel more comfortable using a chemical tick preventative. Some may have had very traumatic experiences with using chemical preventatives in their animals and eventually having an animal with cancer that possibly there was a link there, and so they want to go all natural. And so at our clinic we have developed a number of products to give people alternatives and to give them solutions so that there are options available. But yeah, we need to counsel each person about the differences with those and whether that's suited to them and to their pet.
Right in the back. Trickling out.
My question's for Cole. So obviously you're extremely passionate about the industry and trying to, I guess, disperse any myths about, obviously vaccinations or food or nutrition or anything like that. Were you as passionate when you first started this, or are you more passionate now about it? And do you think that you're going to do any more documentaries even about vaccinations or, I guess the medical side of things with people using tick prevention and things like that? So, yeah.
I think midway through making it, my question was, why am I doing this again? But it was the underlying current of, I'm not going to choose my words correctly here, so everything I do is watched by Pet Food Institute. But it is about the consumer's right to question what's in the products and know fully what they're getting. And it's very obviously confusing, but I think it's becoming less confusing. So after this movie's out, one of the things that I'm doing, and really one of the reasons why I'm here visiting, is basically what I've dubbed as the Talk to Us campaign, which is webisodes. So if someone's writing me from Australia saying, what do? I don't know of any brands here. So then these webisodes are giving more context to how foods are made, who are these companies, why did they start, where did they get the ingredients from, what's the quality, trying to fill in those conversational gaps to where you can, look at the pet food website and say, oh, I'm in Australia, I can click here, oh, there's Raw Feeders Kitchen, and let me give them a call and find out more. Really is a jumping point, I hope. Hope people don't just look at it and just not ask any more questions. The goal is to really get involved in these. But then I am doing a part 2 and then probably never talking about pet food again. But it's like a black hole, it sucks you in and then you can never leave. But I think I'm more passionate about it now. After the fact, I feel like I've started over again. Because in the beginning, I would call all of the companies and I would like to speak about what species appropriate, and everyone would just write you off, as you saw or heard in some of the voicemails and phone conversations. And now it's just more, now they know who I am and they've watched. Today I got a confirmation from Meow Mix. Do you have that here? It's a brand in America where the commercial is meow, 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 meow. It's the brand that cats ask by name. But it's owned by the J.M. Smucker company, which ironically owns Natural Balance, which is veterinarian. So if you look at the marketing, Natural Balance is saying we use no corn and no wheat because they cause potential inflammatory issues, yet all of the other brands that they own have corn and wheat. So their marketing is starting to conflict each other. So I'm still asking the questions. They still don't want to talk. But all I can do is say, again, I'm asking the questions if you want to come to the table. And I actually want them to refute me to the point to where they can break down everything that I say, but I don't believe they can, or otherwise they would be out to get me. But I hope that answers that.
I just wanted to make a point that, given that you raised the point about transparency and the consumer right to understand what's going into these products, it's not just an American problem. There's an advertisement on TV that really, I suppose, got under my skin by Purina, Supercoat, and there's some laughing down the back there. And it's because I go on and on and on about it, because this particular advertisement shows the family out having a meal at a cafe, and they talk about, oh, now it's an order for the dog, and it takes you inside their kitchen, and they say there's 150 grams of fine Australian beef and a portion of barley grain and vitamin and minerals. So I decided, hey, cool, that sounds fantastic. Why are we bothering making a product when this product is so fantastic? I find a company that 150 grams of fresh Australian beef wasn't in every bowl, it was in every bag. 5% real meat. Now, that in itself is shocking. However, I am engaging over the internet, their customer service portal, having a fine old chat, sounding well educated, and I was asking them progressively more difficult questions for them to answer. And so I've got a bit of an interest in animal nutrition. And I said, can you tell me what the carbohydrate content is? And this is a true story. I went through 4 people, all of whom would refuse to tell me, as a consumer, what the carbohydrate load was in this particular dry food. And then they said they would only tell me if they could call me on the phone, so I couldn't have a recorded record of the conversation with Purina. Now this is true, as I stand here. They called me on the telephone. Yeah, great. So let's get back to this carbohydrate question. 46% grain-based carbohydrates in Purina Supercoat. So 46% of that was barley and grain and things that are completely undigestible to a canine at all. And it's one of my favourite topics, talking about the lack of salivary amylase, and that it only comes in the pancreas. And they say high-fat, high-protein diets cause pancreatitis, when inflammation is caused by 46% barley in this apparent fantastic product. So the issue is not just an American problem. Transparency is a global issue, and it's not just in pet food either. But that is why we're very clear, and again, I don't want to make it an advertisement, but you can ask us any question that you like, and we will tell you exactly what's going on, because we have a contract with you that says we'll be honest and upfront. So that's one of those differences that we're trying to implement in everything that we do. So.
And I think for myself, it's, I think for myself, we've sort of reached the point to where it's not about, it's not about bashing companies or companies that happen to be a part of a conglomerate. There's enough traction and enough companies, luckily, because you guys start companies, that are willing to talk about proper nutrition. There were a few whenever I first started making this, it was literally like, you better not criticize corn or wheat. But then I'm like, I'm an American citizen, I can ask any question I want. You're going to tell me I can't ask. And then midway through making the film, all of a sudden it was no corn, no wheat. And I'm like, huh? Like, you couldn't criticize corn or wheat in the beginning, but now it's evolved enough to where enough people around the world are catching on to appropriate nutrition, because I think people have been affected by products or improper nutrition enough to where when people are affected by it personally, then they change, as you had a personal experience. I think commercial products have been around enough to where people have been affected.
And the scientific research is coming. In Helsinki, in Finland, there's Anna Borgman. In New Zealand, there's Emma Birmingham, who I get to talk to on a regular basis, which is fantastic. There's a Raw Friendly Vet Society in the United Kingdom that we liaise with as well, driving the raw or species-appropriate natural nutrition, which is a nice little segue, because recently, in the last couple of days, there's been a post come from the Natural Vet, which essentially is telling the story of how appropriate nutrition and a change in diet can have a significant health impact on pups, in particular on cats and dogs. So can I invite you maybe to share that story with us?
Daisy, is this Daisy's story? Yeah. So Daisy was a puppy that came into me. She was a rescue dog who'd come down from far north Queensland and went through a foster organisation and then landed in a wonderful home for the Brisbane family. And arrived with slightly pink skin, but within a few days, or maybe a week or a little bit longer, was intensely itchy. And so the pet family took her off to a local vet, and the vet prescribed cortisone and antibiotics, and the next day they called us and travelled up to see us at Forest Glen because they were hoping to get a different solution. And when I originally got the call on the phone, I thought, why would a vet prescribe cortisone for such a young puppy? And then I saw this puppy, and it was the itchiest puppy I have ever seen. It was intensely itchy, red raw, losing fur, wouldn't stop scratching in the consult room, very, very distressed, very uncomfortable. And it was obvious why this vet had prescribed cortisone and antibiotics, because they don't have anything else that can settle down this intense type of inflammation in the body of this puppy. So I asked the question, what are you feeding this dog? And the answer was Dr. Chris Brown's food from the supermarket, which, these kinds of foods are promoted by vets who are wonderful people, very, passionate about what they do, but do not have any nutritional training and haven't, unfortunately, looked beyond that. And so, although this food is marketed widely as being perfect and complete and balanced and wonderful for your dog, it isn't, and for many of the reasons that Cole exposed in that documentary. And it was one of the big reasons why I believe this puppy was itchy, as well as the stress that the dog had been through, the vaccinations that the dog had already had, all of these kinds of things add up. And so, within 3 days of changing the diet to a raw natural diet, we put the dog in a bamboo coat to stop her from traumatising her skin anymore. We got her onto a natural wash regime and did a few other things with some Chinese herbs and homeopathics. And within 3 days, the dog was so much more comfortable, settled, the pinkness in the skin was starting to resolve. Within a couple of weeks, her skin was almost back to a normal colour and she was starting to go through fur. And within a month or so, she's back to pretty much a normal, healthy puppy and can now go to visits out at the family farm, which is out west, and she runs around on the grass and doesn't come home red and itchy. And I can assure you, if she'd stayed on that food and had a third puppy vaccination, it probably would have been a very different story for that dog.
That's a fantastic story, absolutely. Round of applause. And there's the old adage that, let food be thy medicine, which is very true. I'm still a work in progress, but I'm getting there. It's a nice little segue again into, I guess, food quality. And Dr. Renee and I had a conversation about sourcing for ingredients for our product. And it's important, I guess, for us to share a little bit about it. The allergens, the pathogens, or even I guess what I'm looking for, the allergens at least, so protein allergies around chicken, for example. If you're sourcing your proteins from feedlot type suppliers, the grains that get fed actually there's parts of that will stay inside the protein. So that allergen will transfer in the food into what you're feeding. So a very strategic decision when we started was to go 100% grass-fed for all of our bovine and to do ethically sourced in all of our poultry, including organic from Green Egg up in the Sunshine Coast. So in terms of asking questions, and not just to us, but for any brand that you choose to feed, anywhere you're buying your product from, if you want to DIY your raw food, then that's fantastic. But get into the habit of asking the question, because no one, as you can see, no one will offer the information that's going to make them look bad. And it's really our job, I suppose, as pet parents, and the more that animals become part of the family, I suppose it's important that we take that moral responsibility just to ask a few questions. Where are you getting your raw ingredients from? Is it local? Is it imported? Is it feedlot? Is it grass-fed? Is it ethically sourced? Is it battery hens? And if your pet food manufacturer won't answer those questions for you, then you need to ask yourself the question, are they a company that you want to put your faith and trust in to provide ultimate nutrition for your animals? So maybe a touch on that if I can, in terms of, and of course being holistic, you're looking for a lot of free-range product, and we talked about the grass-fed. So what is your take on, I guess, the quality of protein and ingredients in food in regards to their sourcing?
I think quality is a very important thing to be looking at for a number of reasons, and certainly the reasons go across the board. So it means a lot for your pet, whether that food is outside, pasture raised, relatively stress-free production type of system. It's going to nutritionally be better for your pet because things like the omega-3 to omega-6 ratio will be better. The acidity levels of the meat will be different, and all of the contaminant levels will be very different as well. So organic, free-range, human grade is certainly what you want to be feeding your pet. As Karen Becker points out in that film, though, that may not be achievable for everybody in every circumstance all of the time. So, you know, do what you can, but that's where you want to move towards. And, you know, ethically, it's a much more responsible choice for us as well. We all share the same planet. We want to be feeding the kinds of foods to our animals that have actually had a relatively good life themselves. I am very much against factory farming, and that's why we don't stock any foods at our clinic that have been through the factory farm system. It's not nutritionally adequate for pets, but it's also an incredibly awful life for those animals to have been through as well. And I do believe that suffering passes through to your pets too.
Absolutely true, and obviously, again, please, absolutely round of applause. The hormones that get released into the muscles when the animals are under stress is obviously going to taint the meat moving forward as well. So it's an absolutely valid point. So, do we have other questions?
We've got one more question, two more questions.
Fantastic.
I've heard a lot of debate about only feeding one source of protein per meal, so not doing combinations and things like that. Is there much relevance to that, or does it really matter if you feed different sources at one time?
I don't think that's necessarily relevant, but it could be very relevant for some pets. So really highly allergic pets, when you're trying to nut out what it is they're reacting to, we do usually try and put them on a single protein hypoallergenic novel diet for a minimum 6 to 8 week period. And so during that period, they will be on one sole source of protein. For the average pet, it can be extremely difficult, much of the time, particularly if you're doing it yourself, to provide a balanced diet that doesn't have parts from different animals, particularly if you're trying to source organic meats, because things like organic livers and organic organs can be very difficult to get. So yeah, you sort of end up with, I guess, the Frankenstein type model where you're feeding different parts of different animals in order to get a complete and balanced solution. So yeah, I don't think you necessarily need to be sticking with the one protein all the time, although in nature that's what they would do. They would eat one animal whole and then move on to the next one when they were hungry. But in practice, I don't think that's feasible in most situations.
So if I can just give you some feedback from a nutritional standpoint, and a little bit around the ancestral, which you're alluding to. The average, if you're doing raw feeding and you're one of those that likes to talk about percentages, 2% of body weight, 2.5% of body weight. The Canis lupus, the grey wolf, which is the grandfather of all canines, had the capacity to eat up to 35% of its body weight in one sitting. 35%. So this whole 2%, 3%, I personally am don't conscribe or subscribe to that theory. It's more about body condition and other health. So where does that jump into the protein question? You're absolutely right. Single protein, it's an elk, it's a caribou, it's a moose, it's what have you. That's about prey availability, okay? In terms of meat products or proteins manufactured for human consumption, it's important to understand they present different amino acid profiles. Okay, so red meats, for example, are higher in taurine. Chicken, for example, has got a terrible omega-3, omega-6 ratio, needs to be addressed. And there's other examples I could give you. So you hear in raw feed about balance over time. And if you're choosing not to feed a product that's complete and balanced, as per the Prouty range, then variation of protein, whether that be on a daily basis or within the same bowl, is important to provide the broadest possible amino acid profiles to your animals. And of course, that's some of the building blocks of health and well-being. So whether it's frank and prey or single protein, as long as you mix it up or you look for the information and do a bit of research around what's going to be right, you can't go wrong with a whole food natural diet regardless. Yeah.
All right, one last question, and then I think it's just about time for us to get out of the cinema.
My question was, since the documentary came out, have you found any of these dog food companies make any kind of responses, whether it's, denying some things that were said or just kind of slyly making new claims or any kind of changes?
Where to begin? I've heard, and you can give me your feedback on this, I would love it. Dry cat food doesn't dehydrate your cat. It's like humans eating crackers. I'm like, what are you talking about? So I've heard that type of excuse. Carbohydrates play an important role. They completely skip over the fact that carbohydrates are not required at all, but they provide excuses for it. So Pet Food Institute, which represents 98% of pretty much everything on the market, as soon as the film was released, they're like, this regurgitates myths and propagates inaccuracies. I'm like, well, what are they? They won't name anything specific, but they can get away with just trying to spread doubt, in my opinion. I haven't seen anything specific that they've been able to pull out from what I presented. You would think that they would run to the moon and back if there was something that they could, ruin my life with, basically. But I don't know. I don't know if they're being silent because the market's moving there, and then that's going to be a financial interest for them, and they're just going to change with the tide, or if basically they push themselves in a corner with the products that they offer. They can't talk about what we can talk about in regards to the topics and nutrition and quality, because there are things they don't want to talk about. So I haven't had any real personal threats, or no one's called me and said, you're a liar, or anything of that nature. So, luckily. But I really, it took a long time to get legal teams to literally basically sue me before I ever released the film, to double, triple, quadruple check that every line in the film has research and backed up forms of research and backup forms of research to validate every form, because I didn't want to leave any stone unturned, because I knew everybody would be looking for any line they could to, I guess, decredentialize the film, So, see, he got that wrong. What else did you get wrong? It was fun to make.
Fantastic.
I think that's, yeah,
Thank you, mate.
that's it. Thank you. It's a very rare thing to have veterinarians come out and speak. Not even that, but to have enough experience to be able to know the information. So I appreciate you supporting fresh feeding for dogs and cats and living it. We need more of that. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank James and Erin for doing what they're doing. Raw Feeders Kitchen, and there are a few other companies around these days as well that are really driving the change in the pet food industry, and that's what we need if we're going to be contributing to long-term health and wellness for our pets. So yeah, great applause and really fabulous, and I'm so pleased that you guys put this event on, and hopefully the education will start to seep further and further afield as well. One thing quickly, if anyone did want to know any more about what we do as holistic vets, I have got a few of our clinic magnets with me tonight, so if anyone wanted one of those, just pop down and see me. And if anyone's got more questions about things like vaccination protocols and natural flea control and all of that sort of stuff, we will be launching some webinars next year, so people can sign up for those and learn more that way about how to keep your pets well. And the very first part of that is all about nutrition and raw feeding, and the first thing you get when you sign up is a raw feeding ebook, so it will hopefully answer a lot of the questions and dispel a lot of the myths around raw feeding. And yeah, we look forward to bringing that to the pet community.
Fantastic. So just one final comment in terms of, I guess, our relationship as natural feeders with the veterinary community. Do not ever think that your vet is not the number one resource for animal wellness. They are well educated, they are highly trained, they are passionate about animals. We've heard tonight that their exposure to nutrition training may not be where we would like it to be as advocates of species-appropriate raw nutrition, but I want to make the point very clear that we are not anti-vet industry. We just want to bring the vet industry along for the ride and remove the commercial self-interest around dry commercial kibble. We could make 5 times the profit that we will make in our business if we reduce the quality of our ingredients, went to dry meals, went to these sorts of things. But Dennis, who's in the front here, he owns our business. He is an absolute champion of animal health, and we would not be able to do this without Dennis and his family's input, so thank you very much, my friend. As always, these sorts of things, whether it be the company success or events like this, don't get put on by themselves, so thank you very much to the team. Erin, Leonard, Rebecca's up the back. There's another Erin around somewhere. She might have popped out to do some, she's out waiting with the gift packs, the freebies. Fantastic. So thanks to the Raw Feeders Kitchen team. Thanks again to Dr. Renee and of course to Cole. Thank you very much for making the effort to come out. But most importantly really is thanks to yourselves, because we can talk ourselves blue in the face about natural feeding and species appropriate and what we want to do for your pets.
And we did today.
And we did today, you're right. 7.5 hours. Thank you. My brain is mush. But we really thank you for your support. We thank you for engaging with us. We thank you for sharing your stories, which we'd like to encourage you all to do on Facebook. Please share your stories, whatever they may be, questions, anecdotes, whatever. We'd love to hear your stories. And go out and tell your friends, your family, your work colleagues, whoever they may be, that this is where nutrition for animals is going. Raw, natural diets will become mainstream sometime in the future, and it won't be because of Mars and Nestle. It'll be because of people like you who support companies like ours. So we, from the bottom of our hearts, sincerely, we thank you all for coming tonight. Hope you enjoyed it. In terms of where you can buy our product from, I can't let you go without telling you. So look out for our Facebook page. We've got Pet City Mount Gravatt. The team are here somewhere. Put your hands up. Where are you, team? Up the back. Thank you very much. Early adopters, foundation stockists, Harbourtown Pet Supplies Direct, and also Cabela's Produce. They'll be all in stock by the end of next week. And of course, any of your local pet stores that might want to support the fantastic Proudy range, send us a message and we'll be out there to see them. So thank you very much. Thanks for coming. Enjoy yourselves. Don't forget your free bag of goodies out the front. Drive home safely, and hopefully we'll get to see you again real soon. Thank you very much. If you would put your magnets into it.